How's it going, YouTube? Having a deck profile for you here. I just got done with the Charlotte Regional in North Carolina, and I went 5-3-1 with 5 wins, 3 losses, and 1 tie with Burning Abyss, Invoked, Kaiju. And I'm here to give you a bit of a look into what I ran here. So let's get started. I ran 3 Alistair, the Invoker. It's your fusion material. You need to run it if you want to play an Invoked deck. It searches your fusion spell, and it makes your deck possible. Then for the Burning Abyss cards, we ran a bunch of 1-ofs, 1 Seer, 1 Barbar, 1 Calcab, 1 Alich, and 1 Graph right here. And then we had 3 Farfa, as well as 2 Skarm. Now these 10 Malbranches were the only ones I ran. I got to draw 2 of them in my opening hand plenty of times. That's all I ever really wanted, and it was always the right ratio. I had access to everything I ever needed, and I would really only recommend running these 10 Malbranches. In addition to the Malbranches, I ran a couple cards to support the Burning Abyss archetype. I ran 1 Fiendish Rhino Warrior, and I ran 1 Tour Guide from the Underworld. Tour Guide is a fantastic normal summon, so is Rhino Warrior. They both get you Dante pretty easily if you only have 1 Malbranch in hand. Tour Guide can be a 2-card Beatrice, while Rhino Warrior is amazing as an Earth material for the Earth Fusion, as well as another Foolish Burial to help you fill your graveyard with more materials to use later on. In addition to those monsters, since this is a Kaiju deck, we also ran a couple Kaijus. We ran 1 of Jizukiro, the Light Kaiju. We ran 1 Dogaran, the Fire Dinosaur Kaiju. We ran 1 Wind Godarla, and we ran 2 Water, the Gamma Seal. So these 5 were the right ratio. I didn't end up drawing too many of them, but I always had at least 1 on demand. This ratio is really good for using with Slumber, as well as the attributes that we're using are especially good for fusing. Water, Wind, Fire, and Light being some of the best fusions in the archetype. The only thing we were really missing was Earth, but we don't really care about Earth because the Earth Fusion is just a big vanilla beatstick. So for spells, we ran 3 Terraforming, 3 Magical Meltdown, and I ran 1 Invocation at the event. Looking back, I really wish I had run 2. I had 2 to run, but I really thought that 1 would get me by. Unfortunately, I ran into a guy who main decked 3DD Crow, and the second one really would have helped there. Other than that, I really didn't need the second Invocation, but now I'm definitely including it, and I would say run 2 if you can, but 1 is still very functional. 1 is still very competitive, especially because you don't open with multiples and brick. Alright, in addition to those invoked spells, we run 2 Interrupt the Kaiju Slumber because it is at 2. You'd run 3 if it was at 3, but it's not because it's a broken card, especially now that Vanity's Emptiness is gone. So 2 is the number we have. It's a Dark Hole. The special summons 2 Kaijus. Then the only 2 other spells we have left are 2 Mask Change 2 and 1 Foolish Burial. Foolish Burial lets you open up with a Graph in the grave to then special summon a Malbranch from your deck that can then use its effect, as well as give you access to any fusion material from your deck if you need to call up a certain one in any particular time. Mask Change 2 lets you summon Elemental Hero, Darklaw, who really locks out a lot of decks. Because you have so many darks and you normal summon so rarely that you really don't care about the discard cost, you don't care about the card on the field condition. It's just a really solid option. Then I ran for traps at the event. I borrowed 2 D barriers from my friend from South Carolina, but I had to give them back now that we've gone our separate ways. So at the moment, I've instead of the 2 D barriers put in 1 Invocation and 1 Lost Wind, and then the other trap lineup is 3 Breakthrough Skill to go with the Lost Wind because they work really well when being milled to negate effects of Zodiacs or any sort of monster out there, as well as 2 Quaking Mirror Force, which really helped in so many matchups. No one was expecting it, topped off by 1 Jar of Avarice. And I can explain the Jar of Avarice in a moment here, but first let's get to the extra deck. So in the extra deck, we obviously want to run 2 Dante, Traveler of the Burning Abyss. I felt 3 was a little too much. You never really summon the 3rd one, and if you are going to summon the 3rd one, you've already returned them back to the extra deck because Dante can return himself back to the extra deck. So you can keep going with Dante's forever in the ideal case. but you really don't need the third one. Instead, you run one Beatrice, because she's at 1, but also because you can also recur her as well as Dante Pilgrim. So these are the only Burning Abyss cards that are in the extra deck. They're extremely powerful in the proportions that they are here. Normally your plan is to summon one Dante, as well as the Beatrice on top of him after milling for some cards. And then if Beatrice dies, you get your purple Dante back, as well as Malbranch in hand to potentially interrupt stuff on your opponent's turn and continue to draw more cards. So that's an extremely powerful portion of the extra deck. In addition to that, I ran a couple non-invoked cards, the two of which were Master Darklaw, which I talked about earlier, and Castel, the Skyblaster Musketeer. So the only times you're making Castel, really, is when you have 2 Elyster on the field, or an Elyster and a Castel, and by overlaying over your Caliga, you can really get around the monster effect floodgate on your own turn to then get rid of a problem card like a Kaiju that you gave to your opponent to then go for game, because this deck is very explosive in terms of damage. Then you have Massacre Darklaw, who is all about preventing your opponent from building advantage. It prevents things from going to the graveyard like Rat Pierres. It stops things like Infernoids and mill effects from Light Swarms. And also, if they search something, you can banish things from their hand, so it stops any sort of adding like that, which is insanely important for stopping more consistent decks. Then it's just the Invoked suite. So I run 2 Invoked Caliga because most of our deck is dark. It's a very powerful floodgate that many decks don't really have answers to, like easily. I mean, they have to work really hard to get around that card. And if you protect it with your Quaking Mirror forces or your breakthrough skills, you can completely shut someone down in 1 turn. In addition to him, we run 2 Raijin, the Wind. Raijin is extremely powerful because it's a Book of Moon on legs, and you can make it off of both Godarla and Castel. So you have access to it natively in the deck. You don't have to run Instant Fusion or anything for it. Then we run 1 Water, which is the Casitas. That came up really important in the Paleo matchup, Paleo Frogs. They can't really do anything to it, and it's really good for stopping them so you can draw into your answers. You can make it off of Gamma Seals as well as the Frog matchups. I ran 1 Fire, the Purgatrio. This won me at least 3 games at the event out of 9 matches total. Being able to attack every monster in opponent's side of the field, get up to insane amounts of attack, it just ends games on the spot if they have no answer for it. I ran 1 Earth. The Earth is really good for pushing per game as well off of Fiendish Rhino Warrior. Problem is the Earth Fusion. I never really summoned it once. I never played against Zoo until the last round, so I never had material to summon it, or a situation where I was able to go for game, or I didn't need it to go for game. Rather, I had 1 Invoked Macabre. I really only think you need 1 Macabre. You really are only going to be banishing your opponent's monsters or your Beatrice or Dante's if they're already in the graveyard, or Jizukiro if you're already done with all of those. But you don't really have to do that because there are other ways to get Invoked Macabre out as far as the grind game. And then you have 1 Invoked Elysium. It's basically a banishing Raigeki on your monsters that face up in your opponent's side of the field. By banishing itself, it can tag out and get rid of everything your opponent has. So that's a very powerful effect. And it can also use monsters from the graveyard. So I'm experimenting with that to make that a bit more consistent and less punishing, because if you try to summon Invoked Elysium without other cards like Polymerization or Fusion Gate or Fusion Substitute, you're just wasting all your resources because you can't get your Invocation back. So time to explain some of the more odd choices. So Jar of Avarice. Why do we run Jar of Avarice? Well, Jar of Avarice is able to take 5 cards from your graveyard, 5 cards, not just monsters, cards, shuffle them all back into your deck, and then you draw a card. So this is insanely important for getting back cards into your extra deck. I thought about running Daigusto Emerald, but 1, it's expensive, and 2, it's actually not very reliable for what this deck needs to do, because this deck goes through so many cards and it has to run so many different things to work and have the flexibility in different matchups that you really have to be careful with what you choose to do. So you can use Jar of Avarice, let's just put that there, to put like Macabre's back, and in fact in the tournament I resolved Jar to get back my Beatrice, my Dante Pilgrim, my Dante XCs as well as an Invocation and some other Malbranch into my deck to get the game. So it's a very powerful effect. You can really stay in the game that way, and even if you get into a grind game enough, a long enough grind game, you can prevent yourself from decking out, which I had to do once. Side deck wise, I had to borrow a lot of cards. I had to borrow some foreign dimensional barriers, so I don't have those with me anymore. But I ran 2 Vanity's Fiend at the time. I ran 3 Twin Twisters, which I still have. 3 Royal Decree. Those were pretty important for Paleo, having the ability to get rid of all the back row and lock down back row. It was really important for consistency, and it doesn't really stop you at all because, you know, you can activate your traps before their traps, especially if you've gone first, because you can just activate your traps and then the end phase flip Royal Decree, prevent them from any of the things they set from going off. Then you have the Vanity's Fiend. That stomped so many of the lower tier decks and the rogue decks. It really made sure I could close things out. You can summon it very easily by special summoning Malbranches. And lastly, I ran 2 Pendulum Hole for the Pendulum matchups, 1 Fiend Comedian for the Infernoid matchup, and then I had a couple more cards that I borrowed. 2 were DD Crow and 2 were Ghost Ogre Snow Rabbit. I ended the whole tournament of 9 rounds with 5 wins, 3 losses, 1 tie. My matchups I can put in the description below, and I can also explain more on how those matchups went. So thank you for watching, and I'll catch you later.